All right. Thank you so much. And I already see some questions coming in through the chat, which is great. Would love to keep this informal and for you guys. So any questions you have, please avail yourself to the chat. Would love to answer the questions that you guys specifically have regarding purchasing property, getting mortgages, and any financing options that we have. So please feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat, and I will get to them hopefully throughout this process. Um, so let's start off with the very beginning with who we are. Most of you guys are already in our inner circle. You already have either pre-approved through us or you've spent clients over to us, but we are NJ Lenders. My name is Gabi Foyer and I am on the East Coast, but both me and my partner, Mark Myman, service clients throughout the country. We're licensed in 21 different states, and we do mortgages for people in all of those states. We try to do many different types of mortgages. So at New Jersey Lenders, we are not one specific bank. We are both a banker, and we work with a lot of the big banks that are out there, as well as a broker where we can broker loans to a lot of smaller regional lenders to supply kind of out of the box mortgages. So when you come to us or when your clients are coming to us, we can both do the normal loans, the run of the mill, easy loans that most of the big banks are able to provide, as well as the out of the box loans if you have a special circumstance or you don't fit into the traditional banking guidelines, we're able to provide loans for you as well. And that's what we do at NJ Lenders. I'm started actually in the mortgage industry in the mid 90s as my first summer job, or one of my first summer jobs. And I've been doing this now full time with Mark Myman for about 17 years. So seen a lot, always see new things every day, but I absolutely love doing mortgages and see new things every day and love to hear all the different stories. So let's talk about the first step of the process, which is getting pre-approved. Now, once you've decided to purchase a property or you're still trying to figure out what type of property you should be purchasing, the first step in the mortgage process is to get a pre-approval. And what that means is you contact us or you contact a mortgage lender and we have a brief conversation on the phone. Normally, the conversation is anywhere between 5 minutes and 45 minutes, depending on the questions that you have. But a good pre-approval should answer all the questions that you have, or at least start to give you pointed answers or let you know where you should be able to find those answers. And we go through your financial situation. We're going to ask you questions about your income. We'll ask questions about your assets, about your liabilities, and about your credit score. And those are normally the things that make up what's going to determine how much you are pre-approved for. People get nervous about the pre-approval. They want to be in the best situation possible before they start the pre-approval, but it's not necessarily where you need to be. The pre-approval can be informal. It's not set in stone. Once you get that pre-approval, it can change based on your situation changing. So for example, if you're in a current job and you're making a certain amount of money, but you're looking for new jobs and you want it and you're hoping to increase that salary, or you're waiting to get a bonus, or you're waiting to get a raise or something like that, it's okay. You can start the pre-approval process. We can answer all the basic numbers and we can let you know, based on your current income, here is what you could get pre-approved for. If you get a raise, or if you get a bonus, or you get more clients, if you're commission based, we'll be able to increase that pre-approval to a new amount. So it's not something that's set in stone. And a lot of people get overly concerned about getting pre-approved and they want to wait until they're in the best situation possible before they start. That's not necessarily the case. You can get pre-approved now, and then as the time goes on, as your situation changes, you can keep us up to date with that, and we can change the pre-approval numbers based on what you tell us. So again, the pre-approval is that informal conversation, and we're going to talk about certain things like your income, your assets, your credit. And it's important to get a pre-approval and not simply a pre-qualification. Normally, and what used to be before, really like before 2008, Banks just trusted buyers based on the information that they provided over the phone. The banks would lend money based on that information. That turned out not to be such a great thing, right? There was a whole crash in 2008. A lot of people who didn't prove their income got into trouble, were not able to pay back their mortgages. So lenders switched to obviously everything having to be shown, paperwork having to be provided. So a pre-qualification most of the time is just based on orally telling the bank what you make and what your credit is like and things like that. After having that conversation, we then follow up by sending you an email and saying, okay, thank you for telling us what your income was. Thank you for telling us your assets and your credit score. Excuse me. Thank you for getting all that information over to us. Now we need to see your pay stubs. We need to see your tax returns. We need to see that documentation, run your credit, get those figures. And then once we can run all the information, we can get you an official pre-approval letter. And that's really important because when you go and you start to make offers on properties, when you fall in love with the property, when there's a property that you want to make an offer on, you need to provide with your offer letter, you're going to need to provide your pre-approval letter. So you want to start out first getting that pre-approval letter before you're going out shopping. And many times we get into situations where buyers are very excited. They're kind of putting the cart before the horse, or they're looking on online. They're looking at different websites and they're looking at properties, and they fall in love with the property and they want to make an offer quickly. And they call us and they want an emergency pre-approval, and they want to get pre-approved really quickly so that they can make an offer before that property is gone. But we need to pause a little bit and we need to say, okay, well, let's hold on a second. Let's see if you're able to get pre-approved for this price range. The last thing you want to do is fall in love with the property, want to make an offer on, and realize you're not in the situation currently to be able to make an offer on that property. So we always say before you start looking at property, it's always best to get that pre-approval letter. And there's both sides of the coin here. We don't want you looking at properties that are over your price range, because if you can afford, or let's say you can get qualified for properties in the 500,000, excuse me, in the $500,000 range, we don't want you to be looking at properties in the $1 million range, right? Because if you fall in love with something in the $1 million range and then you get pre-approved and you can only qualify for the $500,000 range, it's going to be a little bit disappointing and it's going to be harder to find the properties that you like. On the flip side, if you think that you could only be qualified for a certain amount and you're only looking, let's say, in the $500,000 range, but then you speak to us and you realize, wait a second, I can get qualified for the $750,000 range or the $1 million range, that could open up more options for you to be looking for. So you may be looking at only a very narrow amount of properties that are available. But once you do that pre-approval and once you have that conversation and we run the numbers, you realize, wait a second, I could get qualified for more. That will then expand your search and you'll find more properties available. Now, before we go more into the pre-approval and exactly how we deal with the pre-approval situation, let's talk about purchasing. So first of all, you guys have always, or hopefully many people have already decided to buy, right? And there's several reasons to purchase. Right now, what a lot of people who are renting are currently seeing is their rental payments are going up. As their rental payment goes up, they realize, wait a second, why am I in this situation where rent keeps going up? If you secure and you buy a property, your mortgage payment will never change, will never go up. So it fights against that upward pressure that we always have, or many times have with rent, where your rent keeps climbing. When you own a property, assuming it's a 30-year fixed mortgage, that payment doesn't go up, right? It'll stay the same, and it kind of fights against that inflationary pressure that we're currently seeing right now, where rental payments have been going up over the last 2 years, where mortgage rates, if you got a mortgage 3 years ago, even though inflation kept climbing, those mortgage payments weren't going up. When you rent a property, you also are not gaining any equity in that property or any sort of appreciation. The landlord or the owner of the property is gaining all of the appreciation. When you buy a property, at least in the long term, property prices or property values normally increase. And if they're increasing when you're paying your mortgage, not only are you paying the mortgage down and securing equity in the property, but you're also taking part of the benefit of having that future appreciation as the property gains value. When you're renting, you're not really getting that as well. And then furthermore, and I think this is an important piece that I also hear from my clients a lot, that they want to purchase properties because they don't have security or long-term security in the place that they're currently living in. You're at the whim of the landlord to continue to renew your lease. And if for whatever reason the landlord wants to be in the property themselves, or they don't want you in the continue to living in the property, you may not have that security anymore in the property. Where, excuse me, where if you purchase the property and you're living there, you're the landlord, you get to make those decisions. You get to continue to live in that property for as long as possible. There was a question in the comments about purchasing now. There was another one that we'll talk about in terms of what to purchase, but is right now a good time to buy? And we're seeing a lot of people getting pre-approved and a lot of people aren't getting pre-approved because a lot of people are confused. And should they buy right now or should they wait? What we're seeing right now is mortgage rates are higher than they've been over the last decade or 2 decades or few decades. But if you look at, where interest rates were, let's say at the lowest in the high 2s, low 3% range, now they could be as high as 7%, or in the 7% range, they were as high as 8%. And that seems really scary to a lot of buyers right now. And they may want to wait and sit on the sidelines and wait until those interest rates drop. I don't think that's a great idea. And it's my personal opinion, but what I see are, yes, mortgage interest rates are high right now compared to what they've been over the last few decades. However, when I started in the industry, I remember interest rates were pretty much in the sevens, high sixes, low sevens. So if you look at let's say a 30-year, 40-year, 50-year timeline, you'll see times in the early 80s where interest rates were at 15 to 20%. And if interest rates were that high, right, and people were complaining at that point, right, and then interest rates were in the 12% range, and interest rates have been in the sixes, and interest rates have been in the threes. So interest rates go up and down, but that shouldn't necessarily be a determining factor whether or not you purchase or not. Historically, interest rates are still quite low, being in the sixes and sevens, let's say. Whereas, like I've said, we've seen a spread of interest rates from anywhere between 3% and 18 to 19%. So historically, we do see interest rates still in a pretty reasonable area. Now, what I'm also seeing is that because interest rates are higher than they've been in the recent future, is we're seeing, at least right now, some negotiability with price. Now, this is going to be will change based on the neighborhood that you're looking in, based on the state that you're in. We have people here in California. We have people here in on this webinar from New York. So we're seeing people from all over the place. And, it's hard to make generalizations throughout the country, but we do see this changing where we do have a lack of inventory. There is not a lot of inventory on the market right now. So it's still kind of a balanced market where you don't have a lot of demand because interest rates are higher than they've been, but you also don't have a lot of availability. So that does increase the demand somewhat. But you are seeing in certain areas right now, because interest rates are higher than they've been in the short term, you're seeing that there is some negotiability in price. Prices in certain areas are starting to drop a little bit. And that's important because I don't think there's going to be a huge crash, at least from what I'm reading online and reading from experts and things like that. I don't think there's going to be a huge crash in the market, because in order for that to happen, there would have to be a lot of inventory available on the market. We just don't see that happening right now. But we are seeing some negotiability in terms of prices, right? Prices are dropping a little bit. Sellers are open to some concessions and things like that. Now, when interest rates drop, and what's going to happen is you're going to have all of the buyers that have been waiting over the last, let's say, 2 years while interest rates have been climbing. All of those buyers are going to hop back into the market, and all of a sudden you're going to see much more demand and still the same restricted inventory. So you're going to have tons more buyers coming back into the market. and not such a huge flood of inventory. And what's going to happen to prices, where now prices are a little bit soft? Again, in certain neighborhoods, it varies place by place, but where you have that um, some negotiability right now, that will go away once interest rates drop. And once all these buyers come back into the market, obviously, the more competition there is, the higher the prices will go. So so I think now is actually a great time to buy because interest rates are high. I know that sounds crazy, but like I'm saying, I think that as soon as the interest rates start dropping, you will have a lot more people coming back into the market. And when that happens, all of a sudden the negotiability goes away. You're starting to see bidding wars again, and then you see price pressure start going upwards. So I think now is actually a great time to buy, even though the interest rates are a bit higher. Now, especially for if there's any first-time home buyers currently on this on the webinar, what we do see is that sometimes when you're putting 20% down, or even 10, less than 20% down, 10% down, sellers kind of shy away from those offers when there are plenty of other offers on the market. So it's harder to get an accepted offer when there's so much competition. When you're that first time home buyer, when you're putting a little, the minimum amount down, it gets more difficult for you to be competitive. But in a market like this, in a softer market where you're seeing these where you're seeing some negotiability, if you offer the price of what the seller's looking for, but you may only be putting 10% down or 20% down, or you want a mortgage contingency or something like that, those offers are being accepted because there's just less competition available currently on the market. So it could be a good time to purchase right now, as opposed to waiting until those interest rates start coming down. So that's what I want to know about purchasing. Now, somebody asked a question in the Q&A here about how important are trends in the real estate market. For example, open kitchens or one-level homes, ranch houses, things like that. What I would say is, with those types of questions, the best thing to do is ask a real estate agent. Your mortgage provider, which I am, we're great at telling you all the different types of mortgage products that are on the market. I can tell you the difference and right now what the trends are in terms of mortgages, but I can't really speak on what specific types of properties are hot right now, or what happens to those in 10 years from now and things like that. Those types of trends, real estate agents are much better at watching those trends, and I would refer you to your professional. If you don't have a real estate agent, please reach out to us so we can refer you to a local agent in your area. But I would say ask them about that, because they can speak about that. Again, I think that those things should all be considered, but not as important as buying versus currently renting, because you will forever have that issue, right? You will forever be, no matter what you purchase, will go in and out, styles will come and go, and that shouldn't necessarily play a role in determining if you should purchase or not. So thank you for that question. But we'll get back to the pre-approval question. So we've talked about why you should purchase, even in this crazy market that we're in right now, where it seems like interest rates are really high. I think it's a great time to buy. Now, there is something called, we'll kind of jump ahead right now, but there's something called a refinance. And you can always refinance your loan if you qualify for it in the future. But what that means is that if you get a mortgage right now, and let's say it's a 30-year mortgage and the rate is, I'm just making up a number, 6.5%. When interest rates drop to, let's say, 5%, you can redo your mortgage and get a new mortgage at the new 5% range. You're not stuck with that 6.5% mortgage for the entire life of the loan. It does cost money to refinance. There are fees that are involved in that. Usually it's a few $1,000s, again, depending on your state, depending on the type of mortgage that you're doing. Many times those fees can be rolled into the mortgage, or you could take a slightly higher interest rate to finance those fees and for those fees to be included in the mortgage, so you don't have to come out of them out of pocket. But the mortgage rate that you get for your mortgage is not necessarily the mortgage that you will have for the entire life of the loan. So if you purchase now because the prices are right, that price gets locked in for the entire life of the loan, right? The seller can't come back to you and say, you bought the house for this amount, now prices went up, I want more money, right? You lock in the price as soon as you buy it, but the interest rate is just temporary. As interest rates drop, you will have those opportunities to come back to us and refinance those. And we run an analysis for you and we say the cost to refinance is this, and the savings will be that. And you can make a decision whether or not it makes sense for you to refinance or not. But it just kind of throw that in there when you're deciding whether or not to purchase or not. The purchase price is a lot more important than the interest rate, because the interest rate is temporary, whereas the purchase price is permanent. If you wait to buy and for interest rates to drop, but then prices go up, you're going to be in that worse situation, because again, you're going to have to be locked in that higher price, and then you get that lower interest rate, which you would have gotten if you purchased now. Okay, so let's talk about back to the pre-approval. So what do we discuss on the pre-approval? You have a discussion with us, and again, you reach out to myself or Mark Byman or somebody on our team, and we can set up a time to chat with you. And we're going to be talking about your income, your assets, and your credit and your liabilities. So when it comes to income, what banks are looking for is they're looking to see what your steady monthly income is. If you have a salary, we just look at your gross salary. So if you make, we'll just use easy numbers. If you make $120,000 salary a year, that's $10,000 a month. So we want to see that you've got a steady $10,000 a month. Or if you have a salary, that is what we look at, just whatever your gross monthly income is. If you are commission-based, or if you are self-employed, or you are hourly, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a 2-year history of what your income has been over the last 2 years. So right now, it's already crazy. We're almost in June, but we're going to look at your income from 2022 and 2023 to see what your full year's income for those. Again, this is only for people who are commission-based or hourly, or who own their own business, people who are self-employed. We're going to look at your full last 2 years of tax returns, and we're going to say, okay, it may be that you're making a certain amount right now, but if you don't have a track record of making that over the last 2 years, we're going to use the average of the last 2 years, not what you're currently making over the last 5 or 6 months. So that's kind of important. Now, some of you, especially if you're business owners, may not have filed your taxes yet. You may be on extensions, and that's not a problem. You can always reach out to us. We can look at your draft tax returns and things like that, and we can kind of advise you on what we're looking at. But normally, if you're a business owner, we're looking at your net income, not simply the gross income that you've had over the last 2 years. So your write-offs do matter. But we can work with you on those, and we've got a lot of kind of out-of-the-box product for people who are self-employed, who maybe write off a lot of income, or maybe haven't filed their tax returns, or don't show a lot of income on their tax returns, or maybe had a down year last year or 2 years, where there's certain trends that are happening. There are some loans that don't necessarily look at your tax returns to get you income. But it is important to have those numbers in front of you when you do get that pre-approval, because we will be asking you what your salary is, if you're commissioned, a general idea, or if you're hourly, what you generally have made over the last 2 years, so that we can get that information. If you're a buyer who not only has a salary, but you also get a bonus, we can include that bonus income in with your salary as well. Now, it gets a little complicated in terms of how we look at it, but similar to the commissioned or self-employed or hourly employees, we're going to look at an average of your last 2 years of bonus history, as long as it's going up. If it's going down, they only look at your most recent bonus year history, but we can include bonus income into your calculation when we're looking at your income. If your bonus is not liquid, for example, for those in the tech industry, if you're getting RSU or restricted stock units, it gets a little technical, where we need to see your vesting schedule and how long you've been receiving bonuses for. But we will look at a 2-year average of your restricted stock units. Some lenders are okay with RSUs, some lenders aren't. So always come to us and ask us the question if that does apply to you, because we want to make sure that we're calculating your income. But what this also means is that if you do not have a 2-year history of being self-employed, or a 2-year history of receiving bonus, or 2 years of being an hourly employee, that can affect how you are pre-approved. So one of the things, and we'll talk about some things afterwards, but you don't want to switch jobs midway through the mortgage process. Or if you do, you'd want to bring that to us, and we can advise properly on how that's going to be looked at from the bank. Because if you're making a salary and a bonus at your current company, and all of a sudden you switch and you go to a different company, and now you're hourly, that's going to totally change our calculations, and it may be that you no longer qualify for that loan. So when we do the pre-approval, all that information, like I said, can change. So if you do change jobs, the pre-approval will change. So always bring it to our attention if you're switching jobs throughout the process. But that's how we look at income. Pretty easy, but we're going to ask you some questions about your income on that initial conversation. And once you answer those questions, we'll ask you for copies of your pay stubs, your tax returns, things like that that show your income on it, depending on the type of employment that you have. If you own your businesses, we're going to want to see the business tax returns, but we take a look at those, and that's how we can calculate your income. When it comes to assets, normally you'll need enough sufficient assets to put your down payment down. When you first go into contract on a property, you have to have an earnest money deposit, and the rest of the money isn't due until closing. So depending on the state that you're in, if you're in California, usually the earnest money deposit is 3% or 5% of the purchase price. If you're in New York, it's usually 10% of the purchase price, but that's on contract signing. You have to write a check for that amount, and that goes into escrow with the escrow agents. The rest of the money isn't due until you actually close on the loan, usually 30 to 60 days later. So you want to be prepared to have, when you do show us your assets, if you're getting gifts from parents or from family members, you want to make sure, or liquidating assets, you want to make sure that when you do make offers, once you're in contract, you'll have at least a certain amount of those funds to go into escrow to be able to write that initial check, but the rest of the funds won't be due for probably 30 to 60 days, again, depending on your state, depending on the contract negotiations, depending on the timeline. The rest of the funds won't be due until closing. So we talk about your assets, and we ask you what you have liquid, what you have in stocks and bonds, what you have in retirement. That all counts towards your total liquid assets. But if you're putting 20% down, and let's take a round number, let's say you're purchasing for $1 million and putting 20% down. So you're going to need your initial escrow deposit at the beginning of either $30,000 to $50,000 if you're in California. It could be $100,000 if you're buying in New York. Different other parts of the country are going to be somewhere in between 3% and 10%, but you'll need those funds up front to make your earnest money deposit. The rest of the, let's say you're putting 20% down, the rest of the $200,000 will be due at the closing. You'll also have closing costs. Now, closing costs also vary depending on the state that you're in. If you're in California, you're normally looking for, if you're purchasing under, let's say 5 million or under, you're looking at 1 to 1.5% of the purchase price in closing costs. So if you're purchasing $1 million property, you're looking around $10,000 to $15,000 in closing costs. If you go above that $5 million mark, you now have a mansion tax that California passed that could come into play. In New York, if you're purchasing in New York, there are significantly more closing costs, but that will depend on the type of property. So if you're purchasing a condo or a house, you're normally looking at anywhere between 3 to 4% of the purchase price. So let's say on $1 million property, you're looking at anywhere between $30,000 to probably $45,000 in closing costs. But if you're looking at a co-op, you're looking at much less closing costs. We won't go into that now, but co-ops are not considered real property, and therefore the closing costs are a lot lower. You don't have title insurance or mortgage recording tax on those. In New York, if you go above that $1 million mark, you will have the mansion tax, and that will be based on, it's an additional, starting at $1 million is additional 1% of the purchase price as a fee that you pay for purchasing in New York. And that'll change again. The higher you go, the higher the percentage is, but that will change again depending on the where you're purchasing in New York and the purchase price. But there, when we do the pre-approval, we want to make sure that you have enough funds for that initial escrow deposit, for the remainder of the down payment, and then the closing costs as well. And we'll kind of run those numbers for you, and we'll give you some quick estimates of what the closing costs will be. And then you can, based on the property type, based on the state that you're in, and we could say, based on this, here's how much you should have. We don't need all of the money to be in your bank account, ready to go in your checking account at this point, because you don't even have a property in mind. Again, you're just doing the pre-approval right now, so we can hold off and wait to get those funds until later. So if your parents are helping you out, or you're getting money from other family members, or you want to liquidate assets from your stock accounts or from your 401k or anything like that, you don't have to have it liquid up front right now. We can wait a little while, until you have that property in mind and you're already going through the mortgage process. Then we can start to say, okay, now you want to start liquidating, and we'll advise you how quickly you need to get those gifts from family members, or getting liquidation from your various stock accounts and things like that. Gifts are okay from family members for most types of mortgages. So it does happen a lot, as long as it's an immediate relative of yours. And even that is a little bit difficult in terms of determining what is considered immediate relatives, but definitely your parents, your siblings, your children, your grandparents, they can gift you funds. We just need them to sign a gift letter stating that it's a gift. It is not required to be paid back. And then we also need proof of the funds once they do transfer it over. Again, not at the pre-approval stage, but later on when they're getting the mortgage, we will need to see proof of the funds leaving their account going into your account. And once that is deposited, the underwriter sees that and is okay with those funds as long as everything matches. So that's what we look at in terms of assets. In terms of credit scores, people get very nervous about running their credit, but it is something that needs to be done during the process. But we will do a hard inquiry credit pull on your credit report. We look at all 3 credit bureaus. And it's important because the reason you need to do it at the time of pre-approval is because we're going to be doing it at the time of the mortgage, and we don't want there to be any surprises. There are 3 different credit bureaus that we look at: Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. And many times, let's say TransUnion will have information that Equifax or Experian doesn't have. There's not one that's better, one that's worse, but there are times that we see one bureau has information that another bureau doesn't, or scores. You could have a 750 with one bureau and a 700 at another bureau, and we're going to take the middle score of the 3. So it's important to do a hard pull so that we can, at the pre-approval stage, so we can see exactly what your credit score is. Now, there has been plenty of times over the last 17 years that I've been doing mortgages where we've found erroneous information on credit reports that is pulling somebody's credit score down. So people have said, I've got fantastic credit, I never make any of my payments wrong. And then we run their credit score and I say, oh, you have a late on your Verizon cell phone bill that went to collection 2 years ago, and that's pulling your credit score now. And the borrower will say, that wasn't me, it didn't happen, or it was a mistake. Great. I'm happy that we did this at the time of pre-approval, because now you can call Verizon or whoever it is, and you can work on getting a letter to get that deleted off of your credit report, which will take some time. If you wait until you're doing the mortgage process and you're in the middle of the mortgage process and we run the credit report and we see that incorrect thing on your credit report, it is not a quick fix, and you may be stuck with a lower credit score, which could drastically affect your interest rate. So you may have a higher interest rate simply because you didn't prepare early enough. So it's always important to run your credit before you start the process. And we do this for you. We do it for free as part of the pre-approval process, that we will run your credit to make sure, number one, we know exactly what your credit score is, but also if there is any negative information or derogatory remarks or anything like that on your credit report, we can let you know, and you can help us get the information that we need to then be able to maybe rescore you and get you a higher score when you do, when it is time for you to get your mortgage. Now, the most important thing that we're going to look at, not only are we going to look at your income and assets and your liabilities, your FICO scores and things like that, but what we do look at is what's called your debt to income ratio. And what that means is the numbers that we're looking at when we see all of this information is what is your monthly income and what will your monthly liabilities be once you do purchase the new property as a ratio to your monthly income. So we want to know what your student loan payments are, what your credit card bill payments are that you don't pay off at the every month, your car loans, your car leases, any revolving debt that you have. All of that gets taken into consideration. We don't care about your cell phone bill or your cable bill or how often you go out to restaurants and things like that. We don't care about any of that stuff. We care about the stuff that's revolving month to month on your credit report. And we look at that with the mortgage payments, plus the taxes and the insurance of the property. And what are all of those monthly liabilities? What are those as it pertains to, as a ratio to your monthly income? So that's the most important thing that we look at. It's called your debt to income ratio. And we're going to be running that. And that's what we look at on our end. Most of the time, and I know this is going to sound crazy, but let's say again, you make $10,000 a month gross salary. We want to make sure if it's a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac loan, that your monthly liabilities are not more than $5,000 a month, right? We want to make sure it's less than 50% of your monthly income. Some lenders set that to like 43%. Now that's a tremendously high amount, but that's usually what lenders look at. They want to make sure that your monthly liabilities are not going to be more than 43 to 49.9% of your monthly income. So you might not want to go that high when it comes to getting pre-approved, but that is important because again, we look at that, we look at your monthly income versus your monthly expenses. If you do have a car loan that maybe is weighing down your debt to income ratios, or you've got a lot of outstanding credit card debt or something like that, part of the process, we may ask you, or we may suggest for you to pay those things off, especially if they're going to be a lot higher interest rate. We'll ask you to pay those off, or say if you paid those off, you will then qualify for a higher mortgage, and we can run those numbers for you. And sometimes buyers have paid down revolving debt or car loans or things like that, or student loans, in order to qualify for higher mortgages. And we can advise you on those things. So that's really the pre-approval. We're going to have that conversation about your income, your assets, your liabilities, your credit score, things like that. And then we'll send you an email right after and say, okay, now fill out a loan application, send us all of this information, send us your pay stubs, your tax returns, your bank statements, and permission to run your credit. And once we have that information, we can run the numbers and we can get you pre-approved. None of this costs any money, and none of this officially ties you to us, or for sure links you and says you have to get a mortgage now or something like that. It's all preliminary. It's we provide this to you as a service, hoping that you will use us for the mortgage when you do get that mortgage, but it doesn't tie you to us. And again, those numbers are not set in stone. If we pre-approve you and then you get a raise, you can simply call us back and say, hey, I just got a raise. I'm now making more income, or I'm, switched jobs, or I got a bigger bonus or something like that. And we'll just say, oh, send us your updated pay stub, or send us the offer letter for the new job. And we can adjust the pre-approval based on that information that you send us over. I'd like to talk about different types. We'll kind of switch gears a little bit, but talk about different types of loan programs. So there's a lot of different types of loan programs out there. A lot of them have gotten bad names for themselves online, or after 2008, everyone said adjustable rate mortgages were terrible and negative amortization mortgages were terrible. But this kind of goes in and out, and it really depends on the types of your risk, your openness to risk versus the current market that we're in. So the safest loan program that most buyers go with are fixed rate mortgages. And those mortgages are normally 30-year mortgages. And that 30-year you can get a 10-year fixed and a 15-year fixed also, but the most popular one is a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, where the interest rate is fixed for the entire 30 years of that loan. So when you lock in that interest rate, once you're in contract to buy a property, you lock in the interest rate. Your first mortgage payment and your 360th mortgage payment 30 years later will be exactly the same. It will never change because the interest rate will never change. That is the safest type of mortgage. A majority of buyers go with that mortgage because it's the safest. Now, because the bank is guaranteeing that rate for 30 years, it's the riskiest for the bank because if interest rates go up, they're stuck with those loans at the lower performing interest rate. So because of that, they also carry the highest interest rate because it's fixed for the full 30 years. Now we're in an environment right now where it looks like interest rates, or they're predicting interest rates will be falling within the next few years. So that's where adjustable rate mortgages, also known as ARMs, ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages, come into the picture. And adjustable rate mortgages are usually 30-year mortgages, but the rate is fixed only for the first 3 years or 5 years or 7 years or 10 years. So the interest rate is fixed, let's say on a 5-year ARM, it's a 30-year mortgage where the rate is fixed for the first 5 years. And in year number 6, it starts adjusting to where the current mortgage interest rates are. If the current mortgage interest rates are higher than what you locked in at initially in year 6, your mortgage rate will go up. If interest rates are lower, it'll go down. And it's not like the bank can just decide what interest rates are and how they can determine that. There's very specific metrics or indexes that they use. So there's an index that they use, like the 1-year treasury yield. So they'll say your interest rate in year 6 and on will be the 1-year treasury yield plus a certain amount, plus 2%. So you'll know exactly what it is. And there's caps where your interest rate can only go up or down based on those caps, a certain percentage a year. So it can't be from year 5 to year 6. Let's say interest rates go up to 20% in 6 years from now. Some crazy thing happens. Your interest rate can't go from 5% to 20% in 1 year. It can only go 2%, let's say, a year. And it can only go up a maximum of 6% throughout the life of the loan. But so adjustable rate mortgages do have this additional risk based on them because you are only locking in the interest rate for, let's say, on a 5-year ARM, you're only locking in the interest rate for 5 years. And then after that, it adjusts. But their interest rate is a lot lower on a 5-year ARM than they are on a 30-year fixed. When you're in an environment where interest rates are predicted to drop, a lot of people go with those adjustable rate mortgages, hoping or assuming that within that 5-year period, they will be refinancing once interest rates drop to a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. When interest rates were at 3%, nobody got adjustable rate mortgages because everybody assumed the interest rates were only going to go up from there. So everyone is locking in their 30-year fixed mortgages. And now they've got those 3% mortgages that they will have forever until they sell or pay off the loan. But right now, where interest rates are on the higher side of things and are predicted to drop, people are going for the adjustable rate mortgages so that they can lower their payments, at least for the first couple of years, and then they'll refinance within those years. But that is an additional risk that you're taking, hoping that the interest rates will drop and you'll still be able to refinance. There's also a type of loan called an interest-only loan, where it's usually attached to an adjustable rate mortgage. But normally when you make your monthly mortgage payment on a regular loan, you're paying interest to the bank, but you're also paying down the loan, called principal. So you're making principal payments and you're also making interest payments. An interest-only loan is for a portion, let's say 5 years or 10 years, or depending, again, like in adjustable rate mortgages, there's different ways of fixing it in, but you only pay interest on the loan. You don't pay the balance of the mortgage down. Again, there are risks associated with that because the less principal you pay down, when it does transfer into a principal and interest loan, the monthly payments will be a lot higher. So these are great loans for people who are, let's say, in the commission industry or in an industry where they're getting a low salary but a high bonus, and that allows them to make a lower monthly payment each month. But then once they're required, once they get their bonus or once the commissions do come in, then they can aggressively pay down the loan. So those are good loans. Again, all of these loans, none of these loans are bad loans. None of these loans are good loans for everybody. Every person has a different, assessment of risk and a different comfortability that they are with these types of risks. Some people will only go with 30-year fixed loans. Other people will only go with adjustable rate mortgages. It just depends on the personality. It depends on the type of loans that you're looking for. And it depends on, like I said, sometimes people who are in certain industries or get paid certain ways want to take those types of loans over others. Furthermore, and again, if anybody does have questions, please put them in the chat. So I do see a question here talking about bridge loans and other short-term loans. So we do offer bridge loans. And what a bridge loan is, one of those things that Google is great and the internet is great, but it's also not so great. Because if you look at something that changes or where definitions change, a lot of times you can end up with a lot of incorrect information. So bridge loans are temporary loans normally meant, and the definition has changed. What they used to be a few years ago are not what they are now. What normally they are right now are to help buyers who currently own property. You own a property right now, and let's say it's worth $750,000, and you're looking to purchase a property for $1 million. So you want to go up in value, but you don't have the down payment for the new property until you sell your old property. But if you sell your old property, you'll have the money, but then where are you going to live in the meantime? So a lot of buyers, what they try to do is they try to sell their property at the same day that they purchase their new property. Almost impossible. It's a very difficult thing to do to get the timing perfect. And you don't want to be couch surfing, especially when you've got 3 cats or young children or certain disabilities or certain things like that. You don't necessarily want to be crashing on people's couches in that in-between stage. So what a bridge loan allows you to do is cash out on the equity, on some of the equity that you have in your current property. So you get another loan on your property. You probably currently have a mortgage on your $750,000 house. You can get a mortgage on that property that takes out some of the equity, use that equity as the down payment on the new property so you can purchase that new property and then sell your old property as quickly as possible and then pay off the bridge loan and pay off your current loan. So that's how bridge loans work. It's a little complicated. There's a lot of different ways to accomplish that bridge loan, but that's basically what bridge loans or short-term loans do, is they allow you to access the equity in your current property. If you're a current homeowner, access that equity, use it as the down payment on the new property, and then purchase, so you could purchase the new property before you sell the old property. And you can do this while you're listing your current property for sale. So you can make the time from selling your old property to buying the new property as short as possible, but it allows you to buy the new property first before you sell your current property. So that's where the bridge loans kind of come into play here. The closing costs are higher on bridge loans because they're meant to be short-term loans. So on average, again, this changes state by state, but there are additional fees on a bridge loan. Usually you're going to have higher upfront costs. The interest rates are normally pretty similar to what you're going to get on a regular loan. So you're going to be in the 7% range, 7 to 8% range, depending on the type of bridge loan that you get. Some are going to be in the 8s or 9s, some will be in the 5s or the 6s. But, depending on the types of loans that you get, a bridge loan will have similar interest rate, but the fees will be high because it's a temporary loan. So the bank isn't going to make money off of the interest that you're paying month after month after month. You're probably only going to have that bridge loan for, let's say, 2 to 3 months. So they charge you higher upfront costs on the bridge loan. It's not crazy high, but if you compared your other options, it's usually a great deal. So what used to have to be is you used to have to sell your current property, then move into temporary housing, buy the new property, and then move again into the new property. So you're talking about moving twice. You're talking about money for an Airbnb or for wherever you're going to be in the meantime, in temporary housing or in a hotel, possibly having storage and things like that. Those fees are all going to add up. What a bridge loan allows you to do, even though there are fees involved, is you don't have to have that temporary housing. You can go from your current property to your new property seamlessly, and avoid all those costs. So that's kind of the cost benefit analysis. And we do that with you. We'll say, here are the costs of the bridge loan, and here's how you can move into the new property without having to sell first. And if it's for you, great. If you rather sell first, that's an option as well. With the remaining time that we have, I'd like to go through a few different pitfalls during the process that we ask you or want you to know about to avoid during the process. So we talked about this one, but changing jobs. Just because you're pre-approved and just because even when you're getting the loan, if you have a commitment letter, changing jobs always affects the process until the day after closing. So the day before closing or within a few days before closing, we are going to call your employer and ask them if you're currently employed and the likelihood of continued employment. So you always want to make sure that you don't give notice or you don't change jobs during the process, because if you do, we have to wait until you have that new job. Some lenders are going to want you to actually be at that job and get a pay stub before you can even close on your loan. So if you've gotten pre-approved or you're getting the mortgage process and you're entertaining switching jobs, always reach out to us first and we can let you know how that's going to affect the situation. The other one is applying for new credit. So your credit score, like I said, we're going to do a credit check on your credit score. We're going to look at your 3 bureaus. We're going to see your entire history of your credit. If you apply for new credit, that changes everything with your credit report. Many times when you get a new credit card or you apply for new credit, you get a new car loan or something like that, your credit score actually drops in the short term because you have this new credit. The credit bureaus want to make sure you're not going to go out on a spending spree, spend a lot of money with this new credit card that you have. So they drop your credit score kind of preemptively to see how you're going to handle this new credit. But then once they see that you're handling the new credit and you're doing great, then your credit score will go higher again. But if you're in the middle of the process and you apply for new credit, that could negatively affect your credit score. And when it comes to locking in the interest rate, you could be stuck with a higher interest rate. So avoid at all costs. But if you do need a credit card or a new credit card, or you need a new car loan or something like that, always inquire with us and we'll let you know if that's something that you should or shouldn't be doing. Paying off, this sounds counterintuitive, but paying off debts or delinquent accounts. Everything that you do to your credit is going to affect your credit. If you pay off a delinquent account, that may bring the delinquent account, it may be from 2 years ago, but if you pay it off now, it may bring it as if it looks like you were just delinquent on that account now, which will lower your credit score. So we always want anything that you're going to do with your credit, always check with us beforehand because it can affect your credit score. Moving funds between accounts. We spoke about getting gifts from family members. When you do get a gift from a family member, we need to see exactly when it comes into your account. Any deposit that you have in your account needs to be sourced. So if you have a $3,000 deposit, a $5,000, a $50,000 deposit, we always need to know where it came from because the bank wants to make sure that you're not getting a loan. So we always need to source any deposit. If you're moving funds between accounts, we just need more and more paperwork from you to show where those funds came from. So it just becomes more burdensome on you and on us if you're constantly moving money between accounts. So we always say, try to keep things steady, let the underwriter make it as easy as possible. Obviously, when it comes to making that final down payment and paying the closing costs, you're going to need to move funds over, but we want to make it as simple as possible. So try not to do that. And then the final one is jumping the gun with movers, contractors, giving notice for your landlords, painters, anything like that. The mortgage process is not done until it's done. So even though it may sound like, oh, I have a moving date in my contract and the contract says we're going to close on July 15th. No, and you can't book yet. Don't book moving companies. Don't book contractors to come in and paint or do anything like that. Everything is constantly a moving target. So we never want you, and sometimes there's going to be fees to reschedule movers and things like that. Always check with us. Don't schedule anything. Nothing is set in stone until everybody is all on the same page, and that could definitely affect the process. We're almost out of time here. If anybody has any additional questions, please put them in the chat. I did want to bring to your attention that we do have buyer's guides. We have one for New York, one for New Jersey, one for California, many for different states that we're lending in. We would love to send you one of these buyer's guides. It has tons of great information on here. We've got an electronic copy as well. If any of you are looking for it, we're going to send out an email to all the attendees afterwards where you can request a complimentary copy of the buyer's guide, which we'd love to send you. Any other questions or anything that I didn't cover here, please feel free to reach out to me. You'll have all my contact information. I would love to discuss any of these questions with you. And in the meantime, are there any final questions that anybody has? Somebody's asking, when will your credit go higher after opening up a new credit card? It's a great question. It's usually with after a few months. So you're going to see a drop for a little bit, but then it's going to go back up. It depends on your whole credit profile, and the credit bureaus are actually very mysterious in terms of how exactly your credit works. So we can never tell you exactly what's going to happen with your credit, but we can let you know this will affect your credit. We don't know how much it'll affect your credit, but we could say we've seen from our years of experience, this is what affects your credit when you do things like this, but we never know exactly how it's going to happen because the algorithm that they use for calculating your credit score is a secret. And they're not very upfront about exactly what affects it. So you have to be careful about it. It's definitely okay to open up new credit cards now, but like I said, if you're about to start the pre-approval process, first call us and we can kind of walk you through it. If your credit score is, 800 plus and you've got multiple credit cards and you're looking to just get a regular credit card, it's probably not going to affect your credit that much. If you're borderline, right on the border between two credit tiers, and you apply for a new credit card, that could push you to the next tier. So it's something that you're going to want to avoid, but feel free to reach out to me and we can kind of go through your scenario and see if that's something that makes sense for you. All right, we are already at time. So thank you all so much for joining. I hope you guys learned something. I hope this was enjoyable for you. I had a great time. There will be a recording available for you guys, but like I said, any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Would love to chat with you about any of these things and look forward to speaking with you soon. Thanks so much and have a great day.